The day we were about to head out, Robert called out for me to wear that turquoise blue coat again. I told him to come help me find it. Halfway through searching the closet, he suddenly turned to look at me, his face drained of color. Only then did he remember that the person who owned a turquoise blue coat wasn't me. Chapter 1. The slip-up caught him off guard. For a moment, he was so panicked he couldn't even find the strength to stop me. I glanced at the closet he just rummaged through and found the whole thing increasingly ridiculous. As I turned to leave, he reached out again and finally grabbed my arm. His panic was so obvious that his voice trembled and his words came out broken and tangled. I had to listen carefully just to understand him. Melisande, I'll admit it, whatever I've done wrong. I'll own it. But can we finish what we planned for today first, please? The paperwork we'd prepared for our marriage registration was still sitting neatly on the tea table outside. If I hadn't happened to notice the trees swaying in the wind through the window before leaving, I wouldn't have thought about changing into a heavier coat. Standing by the door, Robert had casually said, as naturally as breathing, "Just wear that turquoise blue coat again. It looks great with your complexion." And just like that, what had seemed destined to be a smooth trip to get our marriage license fell apart at the very last moment. Looking at Robert, whose entire body was trembling with fear, I suddenly couldn't understand where he'd found the nerve to cheat on me. Or maybe he'd always been bold enough. Maybe this terrified act was nothing more than a performance. I shook off his hand and laughed at him for still daydreaming at a time like this. Robert, finding out you've been cheating and going to get our marriage license aren't two unrelated things. You cheated on me. There's no way I'm going to swallow my disgust and stay with you. The strength seemed to leave his body all at once. He collapsed to his knees. Chapter 2. As the sharp sound of Robert slapping himself echoed through the room, I walked over to the tea table and slowly tore apart the documents we had prepared. The red background photo we'd happily taken together for our marriage license was torn to pieces and tossed into the trash. When we took it, we'd obsessed over every detail. We wanted a photo that would stay on our marriage certificate for a lifetime. So we chased perfection in every possible way. In the end, I threw it away without a second thought. Just as I had wholeheartedly planned a future and a marriage with him, he had been carrying on with another woman, a woman who loved wearing a turquoise blue coat. The moment he chose her, he had already thrown my sincerity into the trash. Still kneeling on the floor, he picked up the shredded pieces one by one. He looked even more heartbroken than I did. Then he started talking about how we'd gone from studio to studio, taking countless versions of the photo before finally choosing the one where our smiles looked the brightest. He talked about how we picked today's date at the beginning of the year and had waited for it for so long. While he tried to play the nostalgia card, I kept tearing apart the mask of sincerity he was hiding behind. Robert, I'm not the one who turned all of this into a joke. He kept saying how hard-won everything was. Yet he had never cut ties with that woman. I hadn't missed the word again when he told me to wear the coat. For him to remember it so clearly and say it without thinking, he'd probably seen that coat recently. The moment I heard the words turquoise blue coat, I already had a good idea of what Robert had been doing behind my back. All I could think of was the business trip he'd taken 3 days ago. Maybe the trip had been a lie. Maybe the real purpose was a date with her. And the gifts he brought back for me? Looking back, they probably weren't thoughtful souvenirs at all. They were guilt gifts. A guilty man's attempt to compensate for what he'd done. Chapter 3. When a friend called. Robert was still kneeling at my feet, clutching the hem of my pants and begging for forgiveness. Before I could say a word, a chorus of congratulations erupted from the other end of the line. Melisande, congratulations on your marriage. Robert, congratulations on finally winning the girl of your dreams. We've already booked the place and are waiting for you too. When are you getting here? I switched on speakerphone and held the phone near Robert's mouth, waiting for him to explain the situation. He looked at me for a long time. The cheerful congratulations continued without pause. Everyone sounded more excited and thrilled than the two people actually involved. After a long silence, Robert said only one thing. Thank you. The voices on the other end continued enthusiastically. Then we'll be waiting for you. Don't keep us waiting too long. After I hung up, I nudged Robert with my foot. Only then did he finally let go of my pant leg. Come on, I said. Let's go explain everything to our friends. He immediately started pleading again. Melisande, if you're willing, everything can still go exactly the way everyone expects. I shut that idea down. Not everyone. Robert, I've already told you, I don't want to marry you anymore. And you know I'm not joking. Then I asked him, how about bringing that woman with us? The three of us can show up together. No one will need an explanation. Everyone will understand exactly what's going on. He fell silent before rejecting the suggestion. So I continued. Or better yet, why don't you go get a marriage license with her? We can treat today's gathering as a celebration for the two of you. Once again, he looked like a man losing his mind. He kept bowing his head to me over and over. Melisande, I'll admit every mistake I've made. Please don't punish me like this. See, that's the kind of person he was. He wanted to marry me. At the same time, he loved another woman. Yet when I generously offered to help him fulfill that other relationship, he had never once considered marrying her. Chapter 4. I went alone to the celebration our friends had prepared for us. The moment I pushed open the door, everyone standing near the entrance stretched out a hand toward me. Melisande, come on, let us see what your marriage certificate looks like. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the wedding candies I had bought in advance. Handing them out one by one, their eyes remained fixed on the bag beside me, waiting for me to take out what they really wanted to see. After I finished passing out the candy, I spread my hands. Just candy, nothing else. One of the friends at the front frowned in confusion. How could there be nothing else? I looked up. At the far end of the room hung the large decorative words they prepared for us. Happy marriage. I walked over, tore down the word marriage, and stood there beneath the remaining decoration. Robert and I broke up. Just wish me happiness instead. The lively atmosphere died instantly. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at me, trying to figure out whether I was joking. One person even ran outside to see if Robert was hiding somewhere, waiting to jump out and reveal this was all a prank. I didn't explain further. I simply walked around the room and quietly peeled off every tiny double happiness decoration stuck to the fruit trays. Only after I removed the last one did someone finally speak. Why did you break up? Robert and I had dated for 7 years. It felt as though every possible test of our relationship had already been passed. No one had expected things to fall apart at the final step. Even our friends couldn't imagine what kind of problem could have pushed us this far. I told them the truth. Robert fell for another woman. The rebuttal came almost immediately. Melisande, you know better than any of us that you're the person Robert loves most. I suddenly laughed. Really? That didn't stop him from loving another woman at the same time. Someone took the opportunity to call Robert. His phone wasn't off, but he never answered. As more time passed, no one stepped forward to say this was all a joke. No one questioned whether I was telling the truth anymore. One by one, everyone silently returned to their seats. Finally, someone asked, "What kind of woman is she?" The question broke the silence hanging over the room. I shook my head. I don't know much about her. I only know she likes wearing turquoise blue coats. From beginning to end, I had never pressed Robert for details about her. It didn't matter when their relationship started. It didn't matter how deeply they felt for each other. What mattered was that Robert had been unfaithful. The moment I caught that tiny clue, I knew our relationship was over. Then I heard one of Robert's friends ask in confusion, "What exactly is Lake Blue?" I laughed. "Go get yourself a girlfriend. She can teach you." Throughout all the years Robert and I were together, he couldn't tell colors apart to save his life. Every piece of clothing I bought was reduced to only 2 categories in his vocabulary: dark and light. As for blue, there had only ever been dark blue and light blue. And yet, thanks to another woman, he now knew exactly what Lake Blue was. That was why a single careless sentence from Robert contained far too much information. More than enough for me to understand everything. Chapter 5. I saw Robert on my way home. Just like always, he was waiting outside the entrance to my apartment complex. At this exact time last night, he had spotted my car from far away and started waving excitedly. The first thing he said when he saw me was, "Melisande, one more day, and you'll officially be my wife." Then he pointed at the tree beside him. "It's spent countless nights waiting here with me. Tomorrow, it deserves a big red ribbon too." On the drive home, he had been making plans non-stop, deciding where to place all the festive decorations he'd bought in advance. Looking back on our journey together, he suddenly realized how difficult it had been to make it through more than 7 years. And as he talked, tears began streaming down his face uncontrollably. He called them tears of joy. again and again. He pulled out our marriage registration documents and looked through them. He kept telling me everything we would do after getting married the next day. We would hold hands and show off our marriage certificate to our friends, proving that we'd reached the next stage of life before they had. We would have a candlelit dinner, watch a movie, and hand out wedding candy to strangers we passed on the street. Last night, he had planned everything. Today, none of it happened. When he approached my car, he knocked on the window. I ignored him. My friend rolled down the rear window and leaned out. "Robert, what does that turquoise blue coat look like?" No one at today's gathering had been wearing anything lake blue. That was why my friend had insisted on coming home with me when I left. She said she wanted to personally ask Robert what kind of coat had left such a lasting impression on him. She had also confidently predicted that we'd find him waiting for me. She had guessed everything correctly. The only difference was that Robert now refused to discuss the subject. Through the closed window, he said, "Melisande, I've taken care of everything." In his mind, that woman had become a closed chapter, a problem that could simply be left in the past. Chapter 6. After freshening up and changing clothes, my friend and I went back out to celebrate my return to single life. Earlier, she had pressed one of the small festive decorations I'd torn down into my palm and said, "The fact that you found out before the wedding isn't necessarily a bad thing, and the fact that you're not falling apart over it isn't a bad thing either." In the future she imagined for me, the bad version of it, I'd be stuck in a chaotic relationship, constantly dealing with affairs and heartbreak. So she said, "Melisande, finding out now is a good thing." And just like that, what was supposed to be a celebration of my marriage became a celebration of my freedom. Everyone started congratulating me for escaping a disaster before it was too late. When we came downstairs, Robert was still waiting. He had spent the entire day standing there, waiting, pointlessly. When he tried to approach me and speak, my friend immediately stepped between us. Robert clearly had 1,000 things he wanted to say. I had nothing to say to him at all. My friend and I went out for dinner and watched a movie. As we left the theater with the crowd, she suddenly pulled out the handful of candy I'd given her earlier. She placed one piece in my hand. "Melisande, I honestly thought you'd sneak in a good cry while the theater was dark. But you actually watched the whole movie. Happy singlehood." I couldn't find a reason to cry. What Robert had done was unforgivable. The only thing I could do was cut my losses before it was too late. Even now, I still agreed with my friend's opinion. Finding out before the marriage was a blessing. It was far better than discovering the truth later and going through a messy divorce after years of misery. When we walked out of the theater, my friend suddenly waved toward Robert, who was standing beneath a tree in the distance. It was the first friendly gesture she had shown him all night. He practically jogged over. When he stopped in front of us, she offered him a piece of candy. "Today's a good day." Melisande got her freedom back. "Take a little of that good luck for yourself." Robert didn't take it. Without hesitation, my friend tossed it at him. He caught it automatically out of reflex. As we walked away, he remained standing there, looking completely lost. I knew exactly why. In the candy distribution plan he had designed, there had been a moment just like this. The last piece of candy was supposed to be reserved for each other. We were supposed to unwrap it for one another, feed it to each other, and congratulate each other on getting married. He had accepted my candy. Only now, it was meant to celebrate my leaving him. Chapter 7. As we passed a clothing store, a turquoise blue coat displayed in the window caught my attention. Not just mine, my friend's too. She pointed at it and said, "Let's go take a look." Once inside, we found several more coats in the same shade. I had no interest in trying any of them on. My friend, however, deliberately picked out every turquoise blue coat she could find. The styles were all slightly different, and the sales associate kept praising each one enthusiastically. Finally, my friend said, "Professional questions should be left to professionals." Then she pushed open the door and called Robert inside. When I'd told her how I discovered Robert's affair, she'd gone silent for a long time after hearing that one sentence. Eventually, she'd only said, "Robert sure knows a lot." That was why she was calling him the expert today. It was like a game of hide and seek. Robert would find some inconspicuous place to hide. Yet my friend could always spot him instantly. By now, Robert understood that any friendliness from her was unlikely to lead to anything good for him. and with her standing there in a striking turquoise blue coat. He could already guess why she wanted him, so he stayed where he was, standing beneath the lights, visible, but unwilling to come closer. My friend wasn't about to let him off so easily. Pointing at him, she said, "Stay right there." Then she tried on coat after coat, walking to the doorway each time so Robert could see. At last, she asked him, "Robert, which one matches my complexion best?" Under the bright lights, I saw his pale face. His lips had completely lost their color. I imagined his hands and feet going numb, his mind blanking out, exactly the same way I had felt when I first heard those words. Chapter 8. When we headed home, Robert didn't follow us this time. I politely declined my friend's offer to stay the night with me. When I opened the door, the apartment was dim and silent. It looked as though nothing had happened. Yet in the version of tonight that Robert and I had planned, the place would have been filled with lights, laughter, and celebration. As I sat at my vanity removing my makeup, I finally noticed the gift Robert had left there. That morning, while I was deciding what to wear, he disappeared into the bedroom for a while. When he came back, he'd worn a mysterious smile and told me to wait until I discovered the surprise he'd prepared. He'd placed it somewhere obvious. The problem was that he'd exposed his affair before I ever got the chance to look at it. The day had been consumed by a breakup. The gift had been completely forgotten. I opened the box. Inside, resting quietly on dark velvet, was an exquisitely crafted gold scepter. I knew exactly why Robert had bought it. One day, a friend had shown me a picture of a similar scepter and jokingly explained its meaning. "Whoever holds the scepter is the one I'll follow." I hadn't taken it seriously. Robert had. Robert had intended to place his entire life in my hands. The moments when Robert was most easily persuaded, most willing to believe anything, had always involved me. The first time was when he came home one day and I noticed the mole on his face was gone. When I asked about it, he told me a coworker had casually mentioned that the mole wasn't good for my luck, so he'd used his lunch break to have it removed. The second time was when we were choosing our wedding date. Robert originally wanted the earliest date possible, but after a friend casually mentioned that a certain month was lucky for me, he pushed the wedding registration all the way to the end of the year. Thinking about it now, he really had loved me. The problem was, he hadn't loved only me. Chapter 9. Early the next morning, I saw Robert waiting downstairs outside my building. If everything had gone according to plan, we would have spent today visiting both sets of parents. Instead, all I did was make a phone call and tell my parents that the marriage registration was off. Maybe because I wasn't the one who had caused this mess. Handling everything felt surprisingly simple. The moment Robert saw me, he hurriedly took several bags of gifts out of his car and came over to greet me. "Melisande, I'm sorry, I failed you." Now that last night was behind us, he no longer expected me to swallow my disgust and pretend everything was fine while he apologized. I couldn't ignore the dark circles beneath his eyes. I hadn't slept well, neither had he. I didn't take the gifts. Instead, I brought up the item he'd left on my vanity. I couldn't even be bothered to make a special trip upstairs to retrieve it for him. "Robert, when I find the time, I'll mail it back to you." He immediately panicked. "It was a gift for you." I found his anxiety and desperation almost laughable. "I know, but I can't manage a household like yours, so I'm declining the authority you're trying to hand over to me." He repeatedly promised that he would change. He insisted that he had already taken action. And what exactly did he mean by taking action? Nothing more than ending things with that woman the moment I discovered the relationship. In reality, he wasn't any different from last night. He still believed a little effort would be enough to win me back. Yesterday, it was kneeling and begging. Today, it was a few apologies and a handful of inexpensive gifts. Robert, not every mistake deserves a second chance. Chapter 10. Robert sat beside me while I ate breakfast. Because we came here so often, the owner automatically placed my bowl of porridge in front of him. Sharing a bowl and eating with the same spoon had once been our routine. With practiced ease, he began picking the beans out of the porridge one by one. It was only after we started dating that he discovered this strange little habit of mine. I loved bean porridge. I just hated eating the beans themselves. Back then, he'd laughed and said, "Melisande, your parents must have spoiled you rotten to let you get away with something this picky." Then he'd added, It's okay, I'll spoil you too. And after that, he always picked out the beans for me. He'd gotten very good at it. I told him to pass me the bowl. He ignored me and kept concentrating on removing the beans. Robert, give it up, I said. Even if you pick them all out, I'm not drinking that porridge. He didn't stop. Instead, he told me not to take my anger out on my stomach. Then he brought up the first time he'd ever done this for me. He hadn't picked out all the beans, and I'd accidentally swallowed one. I'd immediately made a face and spat it back out. He'd laughed so hard he could barely breathe. You looked like an angry pea shooter charging into battle. I rolled my eyes, finding him ridiculous. As I turned to look out the window, a woman wearing a turquoise blue coat caught my attention. Since yesterday, I seemed to notice every turquoise blue coat instantly. She had been staring in our direction the entire time. Maybe she was looking at me, maybe she was looking at Robert, or maybe she was looking at the person sitting between us. Then I watched her take out her phone and dial a number. Just as Robert handed the porridge to me, his phone began to ring, and at that moment, I finally saw what kind of turquoise blue coat Robert had never been able to forget. Chapter 11. After Robert hung up the call, the person on the other end called again. For the second time, I saw his face turn pale. There was even a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. Sometimes, the only way to describe certain things is pure coincidence, like how I happened to discover Robert's affair less than an hour before we were supposed to register our marriage. Or how, among all the coats my friend had tried on that day, one of them happened to be the exact same style worn by that woman. Back then, my attention hadn't been entirely on Robert. I had only glanced at him instinctively after my friend asked that final question, so I'd assumed his panic came from being forced to relive the moment when he'd accidentally exposed himself and been caught by me. But now I realized there had been another reason. My friend had unknowingly tried on the exact same coat, and of all the options, she had genuinely liked that one the most. In the end, she had even worn it while asking Robert that question. At that moment, what had been going through his mind? Had he felt that my luck was simply too good? That every answer was hidden behind nothing more than a thin sheet of paper? That if I poked through it lightly, the entire truth would be exposed? After hanging up for the third time, Robert finally noticed the woman standing outside the window. My attention had already shifted back to breakfast. The bowl of porridge he'd carefully picked the beans out of sat pushed to one side. I couldn't see his expression, but I did notice him silently switching his phone to vibrate beneath the table. Then he said, "Melisande, I need to step out for a moment. Go ahead and eat." I heard his chair scrape against the floor. By the time I looked up, he was already walking out of the restaurant. He even had the presence of mind to head toward a spot just outside everyone's line of sight. A moment later, I saw the woman follow him there. If I hadn't already known the truth, I never would have guessed there was anything between them. Chapter 12. The scene felt strangely familiar. 3 years earlier, Robert's ex-girlfriend had suddenly appeared in front of us. She completely ignored my presence and walked straight up to him. Without the slightest hesitation, she said, "Robert, I'm still in love with you. Let's get back together." And just like today, Robert had turned to me and said, "Melisande, let me handle this." He left me standing there and walked away without looking back. His ex happily jogged after him. She looked completely certain that Robert would choose her. I'd read countless stories where the first love always won in the end. So honestly, I hadn't had much confidence in myself. For 4 peaceful years, Robert's ex never appeared again. That was one of the things I appreciated most about our relationship. Yet 4 years later, the classic return of the one that got away scenario still played out. Once again, Robert had to make a choice between 2 women. I didn't think I had any chance of winning, so I spent a long time staring at my phone, trying to figure out how to text my friend and tell her that I'd just gotten my heart broken. Then, just as I started typing, Robert suddenly came back. The first thing I'd written was, "Didn't see this coming, we broke up." So Robert bent down, leaned close to my ear, and asked, "Melisande, you're giving up on me?" The question startled me so badly that I accidentally hit send, while I was busy analyzing his expression and trying to figure out who had won this latest choice. My friend immediately replied. When I didn't answer right away, she called me. The moment I picked up, she practically shouted, "Why did you break up? Did you dump him?" Or did he dump you? That distinction was important. It determined whether her next sentence would be praising me for kicking Robert to the curb or cursing him out for being an idiot who didn't appreciate what he had. I quickly explained that it had been a joke. Her voice instantly returned to its usual gentle tone. Melisande, don't joke about things like that. I got so worked up just now that I scared away a handsome guy who was totally my type. After I hung up, I found myself facing Robert's interrogation. He was smart. He understood exactly why I'd reacted that way. So he asked, Melisande, why would you think I wouldn't choose you? I brought up all those novels where the unforgettable first love always wins. He laughed so hard he could barely catch his breath. Read fewer stories like that. As for why he hadn't handled the situation in front of me, he offered an explanation too. Melisande, this was my problem. I didn't want to drag you into it. So I asked, did you settle everything? Wearing the proud expression of someone expecting praise, he answered, Melisande, you have to trust me. And after that, I truly never saw his ex-girlfriend again. We made it safely through the so-called 7-year itch. I thought nothing could break what Robert and I had built together. That was why I finally agreed to talk about marriage. I never imagined the problem wasn't some grand obstacle. It was that I'd been careless enough to miss the rot hiding beneath the polished surface all along. Chapter 13. When Robert returned, I no longer saw the woman in the turquoise blue coat. How he handled these inconvenient relationships was something I had never been allowed to know. Back then, he told me it was his problem and that he didn't want to drag me into it. Now, it was the same, so he said nothing about what he'd done outside. Instead, he sat down beside me as naturally as ever and asked, have you eaten enough? Then he glanced at the bowl of porridge I had pushed far away from me. With a sigh, he said that I was always like this, whenever I got angry. I took it out on myself. He told me to direct my anger at him instead. In the past, I probably would have. The point would have been to make Robert give in, apologize, and then let me forgive him. But this time was different. I wasn't particularly angry with him. I just felt regret. 7 years together, and our story still couldn't reach a happy ending. And the reason I wouldn't eat the porridge he touched wasn't what he thought. I said, Robert, it feels dirty, so dirty that I can't bring myself to eat it. I rarely used words like that toward him. He froze in his seat. Not a single part of him moved. After all that love, there were no sweet words left. Only words meant to wound. How tragic. Chapter 14. I was awakened by the alarm I'd set for 3 o'clock in the morning. Outside, it was pitch black. Lying in bed, I couldn't immediately remember why I'd set an alarm for such an hour. Only after the haze of sleep faded did I finally remember. Robert and I had planned to drive to the airport at this exact time and fly to the city of Eternal Spring to celebrate our marriage registration. During the chaos of that day, I had explained to my family and friends why I was no longer marrying Robert. I had canceled every reservation and every plan we'd made for after the wedding registration. The only thing I'd forgotten to cancel was the alarm. When we planned the trip, both Robert and I had been excited. It was also the city where we first met. That day, I had been talking to a friend on the phone in our hometown dialect. Somewhere in the crowd, Robert heard my voice. The familiar accent caught his attention immediately, so he kept walking nearby until I finished my call. Then he came over to say hello. Even now, I don't know how to describe our meeting. We had lived in the same city for years without ever crossing paths. Yet somehow, we met in a city far from home. The streets were packed with tourists. Robert had already been there for 3 days. And yet, among all those people, I was the only person he heard speaking our hometown dialect. So the very first thing he called me was, fellow hometown girl. He was traveling alone. So was I. After chatting for a while, we realized neither of us had any fixed itinerary, and so we spent the rest of the day sightseeing together. It turned out to be a surprisingly pleasant trip. In a way, all those travel-related relationship disasters people constantly discussed online had already been tested between Robert and me while we were still strangers. The next time we met was on the plane home. His seat wasn't far from mine. I simply hadn't looked back and never noticed. When we lined up to disembark, Robert happened to be standing behind me. This time, I noticed him. He greeted me politely, and we chatted as we walked through the airport. Then Robert asked whether anyone was picking me up. My car's been parked here the whole time. He said, I can drive you home. That day, we talked about everything and nothing during the drive. Eventually, the conversation drifted to a famous grilled fish restaurant near where I lived. I said, then give me your contact information. Pick a time this weekend, and I'll treat you to dinner there. That was how Robert and I first became part of each other's lives. As for when I fell in love with him, I honestly don't know. One day, Robert suddenly confessed his feelings. I thought he was a good guy, so I said we could give it a try. And somehow, trying turned into 7 years together. 7 years. What a painfully long time that is. Chapter 15. Robert and I had never planned to have a wedding, so the next few days were supposed to be our honeymoon. When we chose this city as our destination, Robert was so excited that he couldn't sleep. In the middle of the night, he even sent me a message asking if we could leave a little earlier. He told me the sunrise here was beautiful and that we'd never watched one together. That was why I had set my alarm for 3 in the morning. At the time, I was buried in work, trying to clear as much of my schedule as possible so I could enjoy our post-marriage vacation without distractions. In the end, the vacation I'd worked so hard to secure went completely unused, and I couldn't bear the thought of spending another pointless day sitting at home, so I decided to visit the city alone. I opened my phone and managed to grab the very last ticket on the next available flight. I watched the sunrise from the plane. The sun burst over the horizon in a blaze of gold. Radiant and magnificent, the sky glowed with endless light. For a moment, my eyes and my thoughts could hold nothing except that breathtaking view above the clouds. And somehow, everything else stopped mattering. Robert was just a passerby in my life. And those 7 years? They were only 7 years of my life after all. Chapter 16. I was taking photographs of the city's scenery when my friend called. With unmistakable delight in her voice, she said, Robert's losing his mind trying to find you. In the wreckage of our canceled plans, Robert had no idea where I was. My friend never asked. Instead, after hearing the constantly changing sounds around me, she simply said, Melisande, have fun. Beautiful scenery and good food really can heal a wounded heart. The sadness I'd felt 3 days ago had begun fading away little by little from the moment I watched that sunrise. I hadn't expected to see the city's famous Love Patrol car again. 7 years ago, I'd been captivated by the vehicle overflowing with flowers. I desperately wanted to ride in it and experience what it felt like to be treated like a princess. Unfortunately, it only accepted couples. So that day, I tugged lightly on Robert's sleeve and whispered, Could you pretend to be my boyfriend so I can ride it and see what it's like to be surrounded by flowers? He replied, Perfect. I'm tired anyway. Let's take a break. Then Robert took my hand and led me onto the flower-covered carriage. As more and more couples climbed aboard, we ended up sitting near the edge, enjoying the scenery rolling past. At one point, Robert pointed toward the distance. If you don't have any plans afterward, let's go check that place out once the tour is over. A flower suddenly landed in my lap. Startled, I looked down. Someone standing below had tossed it up to me. When I looked over, he waved enthusiastically and called out, Wishing you two a lifetime of happiness together. Guilt flashed through me. I nodded awkwardly but didn't dare respond. At the end of the parade route, every couple was expected to step off the carriage hand in hand while everyone applauded and cheered. This time, one of the staff members pointed at me and the person standing nearby before waving me over. I shook my head and gestured that they had mistaken the pairing. Then I stayed where I was, watching other couples enjoy the experience. Looking carefully, I realized that none of the faces on this year's carriage seemed familiar. Perhaps my memory had faded, or perhaps the people from 7 years ago simply didn't have time to come anymore. I supposed life had carried them elsewhere. Chapter 17. The night I returned home, I found Robert waiting downstairs outside my building. We had accumulated all that vacation time together. I'd suddenly decided to take a solo trip, and during those days, Robert had stayed here waiting for me. The moment he saw me, he spoke in a hoarse voice. This is the cruelest thing you've ever done to me. I had never intended to prove my importance to Robert by leaving. And as for the revenge he spoke of, I'd never thought about that either. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone this long without even asking him to tell me the full story of his betrayal. All I'd done was realize that Robert wasn't the right person for me. And once I realized that, I chose not to keep him. After that, I simply needed to do whatever I could to stop the situation from causing me more pain than it already had. I left quietly. Yet in my absence, Robert finally saw his own heart clearly. With complete sincerity, he told me, "Melisande, I can't live without you. These past few days you've been gone. I've been nothing but a shell of myself. The fear of losing you is driving me insane." I was tired, too tired to deal with his belated regret. When he had me, he still wanted someone else. He never stopped to consider what would happen if I found out. Now that he'd lost me, he stood here crying, talking about how he couldn't live without me, talking about how much he regretted everything. It all sounded like a performance forced out by circumstance, a love confession that came only after the consequences arrived. My voice remained cold. "And what does that have to do with me? Robert, you're the one who drove me away." Chapter 18. I didn't plan on celebrating my birthday this year. Early that morning, my friend bombarded me with phone calls, reading birthday wishes she'd found online one after another. I didn't remember a single one. The only thing I remembered was the address she sent me afterward, claiming she'd carefully planned a special birthday party and ordering me to show up on time. I'd never seen so much lake blue in my life. Every friend at the party was wearing some variation of a turquoise blue coat. Compared to them, my all-black outfit looked completely out of place. The only person who looked even more out of place was Robert, who arrived late. My friend secretly leaned over and whispered, "Melisande, I invited him on purpose. I used your birthday as an excuse, so he couldn't say no." And just like that, Robert, who had managed to avoid everyone's criticism before, was finally dragged into the spotlight. The person carrying out the so-called revenge Robert kept talking about wasn't me. It was my friend. She was obsessed with tormenting him using anything and everything related to Lake Blue. The day I left, when Robert couldn't reach me, he called her instead. She said absolutely nothing. She just laughed, and laughed, and laughed. Only at the very end did she manage to say, "Robert, you brought this on yourself." By then, he'd already hung up. Robert was seated directly across from me, separated by a crowd of people. He could do nothing but look at me. He couldn't get close. Every game that night seemed designed specifically to target him. Getting Robert drunk became everyone's shared mission. When his gaze started losing focus, my friend leaned over and asked, "Robert, who is that woman?" Robert only replied, "There is no other woman." My friend immediately rallied everyone to continue. "He's not drunk enough yet." Wearing my birthday hat, I sat quietly and watched the show my friends had prepared for me. Robert kept shooting me pleading looks, but I couldn't help him, because before I entered the room, my friend had whispered two things in my ear. First, she apologized. She told me this might not be the happiest birthday party. Second, she asked me for a favor. She wanted one chance to finally vent her anger. Everyone had once planned to give red envelopes and gifts to the future children Robert and I were supposed to have. What he'd done felt like a betrayal not only to me, but to everyone who cared about us. By the end of the night, the topic still hadn't changed. Everyone wanted Robert to explain exactly what kind of turquoise blue coat it had been. One after another, my friends walked in front of him, testing his reactions. He was clearly drunk by then, yet he still managed to keep his expression under control. Even though my friend had spent the entire evening walking around in the exact same coat, he never let his face betray anything. I stared at the coat for a long time, long enough for Robert to notice, and then I saw it. The surprise, the heartbreak, the realization in his eyes. He had finally understood. That day, I'd seen the woman standing outside the window in her turquoise blue coat too. Chapter 19. When it came time to make a birthday wish, mine was simple. I hope everything between Robert and me ends here. Between Robert and me. Between Robert and my friends. I hoped the damage caused by all of this would end here too. And afterward, we'd go back to being strangers. Robert sat there in silence, listening to every word of my wish. In the end, he left before anyone even had the chance to sing happy birthday. 7 years ago, that trip where I met Robert had been a birthday gift to myself. That was where our story began. This year, I chose my birthday gift to be something else. I chose to leave Robert behind, and from now on, I would return to a life that didn't include him. The feeling was much like the moment I watched the sunrise from the airplane. The world was vast, colorful, full of endless possibilities. Robert was never important enough that losing him could make my world collapse. I was grateful that he had once appeared in my life, and I had finally made peace with his departure. I believed that everything had unfolded exactly the way it was meant to.